Good evening and welcome to Solidarity on Tap. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. On behalf of everyone at ISN, as well as our national Solidarity on Tap sponsors, Mary Noel Lay Missioners, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, thanks for joining us tonight. For over 15 years, the Ignatian Solidarity Network has been uniting the Ignatian family, meaning the Jesuit network, as well as all those who are inspired to work for justice through the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to build a more just world through transformational programs and resources that deepen faith and lead to dismantling systematic injustice. Collaborative initiatives that bridge divides and overcome exclusion, and collective action to defend and promote the inherent dignity of all God's creation, both people and planet. If you haven't already, please make sure to check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. Now, many of you know this, but for those joining us for the first time tonight, let me give you the background on Solidarity on Tap. It didn't used to be like this. In the pre-COVID world, it usually took place in cities across the country, bringing together members of the Ignatian family and local bars and pubs. But like many things, we moved virtual in late March, and it's been a lot of fun, so we thought we'd keep doing it. And even though we're gathering virtually, the goal of Solidarity on Tap is the same: to invite people to enjoy fellowship, maybe with a drink in hand, and to hear powerful reflections from members of the network engaged in work for justice. And as always, in order to build and enjoy community tonight, I encourage you, I really encourage you, let me just put it that way, to utilize the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, or post to Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag ISNLive to let us know you, your institution, your school, your parish, your church, your community are represented tonight. You can also post your comments and questions for our guest speaker this evening on either Twitter or Facebook. So please let us know you're out there, all right? Let's hear it, Ignatian family. I also just want to mention that as we gather tonight as an Ignatian family, we continue to pray for all those people affected by COVID-19. We pray for essential workers. We pray for students, faculty, and staff at the hundreds of colleges and high schools we work with across the country who are part of our work as they enter into these unprecedented times as the school year begins. We also pray for those impacted by natural disasters, by the fires on the West Coast, those in the path of Hurricane Sally down south. They're all in our prayers this evening. Tonight's conversation provides us the opportunity to explore poverty through the lens of the U.S. Census, especially related to race, gender, and the pandemic to an extent. Our hope is that with this and all Solidarity on Tap conversations, that it can lead us toward a hope-filled future. So with this in mind, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight. Her name's Trudy Renwick. Trudy oversees the branches of the U.S. Census Bureau responsible for processing, analyzing, and publishing poverty, income, and program participation estimates collected in the Current Population Survey's annual social and economic supplement, the American Community Survey, and the Survey of Income and Program Participation. Her area is also responsible for research on alternative methods of measuring poverty. Trudy has written a number of papers exploring technical aspects of the supplemental poverty measure. She joined the Census Bureau in 2008 after working for many years in New York as a senior economist for the Fiscal Policy Institute and the Public Utility Law Project. She has also worked for a number of nonprofit advocacy groups, including Families USA and the National Association of Farm Worker Organizations. Trudy studied international affairs at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, Go Hoyas. And so we're really excited to say welcome to Trudy tonight. Trudy, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Oh, good evening, and it's great to be here.
I'm excited to talk about the census. I think sometimes when people hear about the census, they think it's just kind of straight stats and things like that. And it's real easy to collect data from millions of people. But I think tonight we can hopefully get into some of the deeper points of it, especially around how we look at the impacts of and how the census interplays with the situation of folks who are vulnerable in society. But before we do that, I wanted to learn a little bit about you. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your story and some of the connections that you have to the Jesuits. Obviously, you were a student at Georgetown in the early 70s at the height of the anti-war movement. I understand you met the Berrigan brothers, so I'd love to hear about that. And just tell us about how your time at Georgetown and those connections helped to form kind of who you are today and where you are today.
Oh, well, it was, I was really lucky. As a freshman, I got assigned a work-study job. And my work-study job was with a Jesuit, Father Richard McSorley, who was the head of the Peace Studies program at Georgetown. And he was a very big anti-war activist, very good friends with the Berrigan brothers. And I've been thinking about also very good friends with Mitch Snyder from the Center for Creative Nonviolence in DC. And so my work-study job was sometimes making anti-war posters for the next demonstration on campus. And I stayed working with him for the whole 4 years I was at Georgetown, got to be very close with him. And through him, I got to meet the Berrigan brothers because they were buds. He had helped them when they were in jail, and there's some rumor going around that he taught them how to make Molotov cocktails, that when they were burning draft files, he gave them the recipe of how to do the burning. But no, so that was really changed my life in terms of making me realize I had these liberal ideas and I had social justice ideas, but I didn't know that you could actually do anything about it. And he taught me that you could live the good life. He infuriated the administration at Georgetown because he refused to live in their Jesuit residence because he thought it was too luxurious. So he lived in his car on campus.
Oh, wow.
Old beat up car. And he lived there, but he did eat at the dining hall. And he used to take me to eat at the dining hall, the Jesuit dining hall, but he wouldn't sleep there because he thought that he thought they were living too high off the hog.
It's amazing how within a university community, there are lots of different types of folks, including within a Jesuit community. So you learn a lot from those different ways of approaching ministry and teaching and things like that. Now, tell us about those 4 years at Georgetown, those experiences with the Jesuits. Where did they take you then after you graduated?
So I went to Georgetown, went to the School of Foreign Service because I was interested in, saving the developing world. That I had been shocked when I went to Columbia as an exchange student in high school, and I saw the extreme poverty and the extreme income inequality in Columbia. And I thought, I want to do something about this. And I met some young people there who were complaining about how the U.S. government only gives them military aid, doesn't give them any aid for, humanitarian assistance, and that they support dictators and not democracies. And so I thought if I went to Georgetown and studied, foreign service and went into the foreign service, I could change U.S. foreign policy. I learned enough at Georgetown to think that probably I couldn't do that, and that probably, there were enough people in the developing world that could solve the problems of the developing world. They probably didn't need another white woman telling them what they should do to eliminate poverty, and that there was sufficient poverty within my own country that maybe I had to focus my attention here. And so that's what I did after I graduated. Started working for a group that worked with migrant and seasonal farm workers, I was fluent in Spanish, and so I was able to use that to really get my first job working on advocacy for migrant and seasonal farm workers in the U.S.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And now you're working for the U.S. Census, and I want to talk about that. But before that, I do that, I just want to, as I mentioned, I encourage people to share that they were out there tonight. So I want to kind of recognize some of those folks because they've done a good job of letting us know they're there. So I want to just say hi to our friends at the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and we're glad to have them with us tonight. Welcome to Kathleen, who's joining us from Westerville, Ohio. Thanks to Kathy, who's joining us from Bellingham, Washington. Hello to Kaya from Jersey City, New Jersey. Welcome, Kaya. Karen's joining us from Elk Ridge, Maryland. Thanks, Karen, for being with us. Mary is joining us and says hello from the Juneau, Alaska Jesuit Volunteers. So welcome, Mary, in that community. We're grateful to have you with us all the way. I'm not even sure what time it is in Juneau right now, but we're glad to have you with us. Joanna is joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, Joanna. Hello to Nelson, who's in Gardena, California. Welcome, and thanks to the St. Mark Young Adult Ministry for being with us tonight. And also welcome to Adrian, who's an FJV, University of Scranton alum, and is joining us from Long Island, New York. So make sure to let us know you're out there, Ignatian family. Post a comment on Facebook there, on YouTube, or tweet using the hashtag ISN Live on Twitter or Instagram, so that we can give a shout out to you as well. So Trudy, let's talk about the U.S. Census. You've been there since 2008, I think, and this is different kind of work than working with farm workers, community organizing, or things like that. Can you tell us about how the U.S. Census and kind of a concern for justice, a concern for those who are maybe vulnerable or marginalized in society, how do those two intersect? Because a lot of times when we think of the census, we just think of every 10 years, we somehow collect the data, no one understands how it happens exactly, and then boom, we have all these stats and things we can look at. Can you tell us how these two things come together, though?
Sure. Well, for one thing, the census, although we do what we're known for most is every 10 years we do the decennial census. And let me just take this opportunity to thank everybody in your network as a partner who has been helping us get the responses that we need to that census. We need to get to 100%. We need every single person to be counted. It's extremely important. And right now, what's left are the very hardest to count people. And so it's not too late. They can go online. They can fill it out online. They can make a phone call, get themselves counted. But in addition to doing that census every 10 years, the Census Bureau actually does hundreds of surveys, which is not a census because it's not everybody. It's just randomly picking people and asking them much more in-depth questions than we're able to do on the census. So every year we ask over 3 million people to fill out what we call the American Community Survey. And that gives us, that makes it so we don't have to wait every 10 years to get data, but every year we can get data on income and poverty. And the survey that we just released yesterday is what we call the Current Population Survey. And that is where we get our official poverty estimates for the country. That is a smaller survey, about 100,000 households, and asks very in-depth questions about income and employment and receipt of benefits. And we were able to use that to do our poverty measures.
Can you tell us a little bit about, well, just this week you released a report kind of that details all of that. Can you tell us a little bit about the report? I think it's called, it's just called the Income, Poverty, and Health Insurance report, which sounds like a lot of topics to address in one report. It must have been gargantuan.
We actually do 3 reports. So
okay, 3 reports. All right.
Income and poverty.
Pack the names together.
The health insurance report. And then there's a report we call the Supplemental Poverty Measure Report, which is our new poverty measure and an alternative way of looking at poverty in the United States. So on that one day, we released those 3 reports. We do one press conference where we talk about the results of all of that.
Got it. That makes more sense to me. And this is a report that looks, as you noted, not just at kind of these 10-year points, but looks year to year over a point of time. How long has data like that been recorded and kind of published in reports like these?
Since 1960. So the first poverty statistics we have are for 1959. Mm-hmm. We didn't publish them in 1959 or even 1960. The United States didn't even worry about measuring poverty until the War on Poverty. And with the beginning of the war on poverty in the early 60s that we developed a poverty measure and we started to put out poverty statistics.
Interesting. Okay. And so the reports that came out this week, can you give us kind of the broad highlights, or tell us a little bit of that? Then we can jump into, I know we want to jump into some of the specific topics, but tell us a little bit about what the findings showed, generally speaking.
So remember these, we collect these surveys in February, March, and April, but we're asking people about the previous calendar year. So it's all of the numbers that we put out yesterday are pre-pandemic numbers. And it's important to keep that in mind, because certainly the situation in the economy has changed a bit since since then. But it was mostly good news. Real median household income was up 6.8% to 68,700. That was the highest that real median income has been since we started reporting that in 1967. And the 6.8% increase from last year was one of the highest year-to-year increases that we've ever had. Likewise, the poverty rate was down to 10.5%, which was the lowest poverty rate that we have seen since 1959. There were about 34 million people in poverty, a reduction of 4.2 million people less than in 2018. Not such good news on health insurance. The percent of people without health insurance, even before the pandemic, was up 0.3 percentage points.
Okay.
So after many years of the number of people without health insurance going down, it's starting to inch back up again in the last few years, and last year was no exception to that.
And obviously, your focus of the report was to report the data, but I would imagine that some of that is related to changes in how the Affordable Care Act is being implemented or versus years past.
Right. Well, we saw a decrease in, we do look at what type of coverage people have, and we did see a decrease in direct purchase, which is broader than just health insurance that's bought on the exchanges, but it includes health insurance on the exchanges. So we saw a decline in that. And we also saw a decline in Medicaid, which, can be a good thing or a bad thing. If people are making more money and they no longer qualify for Medicaid,
Sure.
that's not a bad thing, right? But if they're not picking up health insurance from their employer and they're now uninsured, then it is bad, and we often think about those people that are right a little bit above poverty, but they're not getting health insurance at work, and they can't afford to buy health insurance, but they make too much for Medicaid. And
Right.
So we did see a bit of a decline in Medicaid as well. Medicare is growing because we're all getting old, but
Sure. Can you talk a little bit? You mentioned you mentioned the poverty rate. You mentioned the fact that we've looked at or sought data to look at poverty since 1959. Can you talk a little bit about how we measure poverty? Like what's the formula, or how do we pull that into something that we can understand and make sense of from a data perspective?
So we have two poverty measures, but let me start with the official poverty measure. Interestingly enough, we've been doing it the same way for over 50 years now. There's really been no substantial changes in how we measure poverty since those very first estimates came out for 1959. And it's a threshold that is the same for everywhere in the country. So it's the same in New York City as in rural Mississippi. It started as taking the cost of a food plan and multiplying it by 3. There was a survey that in 1955, people spent about a third of their income on food. So the Social Security Administration said, well, okay, we know that, and we know how much it costs. We have home economists who are telling us what it costs to get decent food, a decent diet. We'll multiply that by 3, and that'll be our poverty threshold. And that's basically how we set the poverty threshold today for the official poverty measure. And for a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children, it's a little shy of $26,000 a year. We compare that to your pre-tax money income. So we don't count your food stamps. We don't count any housing assistance that you get. We don't count your earned income tax credit. We just take your pre-tax cash income and compare that to the threshold. And if your family's, the total income in your family is less than that threshold, you're in poverty. If it's above, you're not. And that threshold will vary by the number of people in your family and the number of kids, and actually your age, because back in the early 60s when they were first setting this up, the home economists said, well, people over 65 didn't need to eat as much as younger people did. So the cost of their food plan was a little bit less. So they ended up with a lower poverty threshold that they still have today, a slightly lower poverty threshold for people over 65. So that's the official, and there's lots of flaws with it, lots of criticisms of it, but it survived the test of time, right? And it does allow us to go all the way back to 1959 and have this continuous series going back more than 50 years now. The reason I came to work at Census was to work on this new poverty measure, what we call the supplemental poverty measure. And that has tried to address those basic flaws. We have thresholds that vary by where you live. They're much higher in New York City and Palo Alto than they are in rural Mississippi. It takes into account the benefits you get. It takes into account your food stamps, your WIC, your school lunch, your housing assistance, and it takes into account your expenses, the taxes you have to pay, and your childcare expenses you have to pay, and your medical out-of-pocket expenses that you have to pay. So it looks at the money you have available for a bundle of food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, and compares it to, and that threshold is set by what people at the lower end of the income distribution are actually spending on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. So it changes each year depending on how people's spending changes.
Sure.
So
it's a little bit more responsive to not just geography, but also kind of what's happening in the economy and things.
And the wonderful thing that people are able to do with it is to say, how much do food stamps, how many people are taken out of poverty by food stamps? Mm-hmm. How many people are taken out of poverty by the Earned Income Tax Credit? How many people are pushed into poverty because they have to pay for childcare? And so it's a much more intuitive for guiding policy than the official measure.
Sure. I want to dig into it a little bit more, but I just want with a few more folks that let us know they're out there. So I just want to say hi to them. Andrea is joining us from Jesuit High School in Portland, Oregon, and welcome to Andrea. We hope that you're safe out there with the fires out in Oregon and in the Portland area. Sally's joining us from Hilton Head, South Carolina. Welcome, Sally. Mary Kay's joining us from Columbia, Maryland. Alandra's joining us from Whittier, California. Welcome, Alandra. Robin is joining us from Alexandria, Virginia. I think Robin's a colleague of yours, a friend of yours. So welcome to Robin. Thanks for joining us, Robin. Brendan is with us. He's a fellow Hoya, class of '84, and says hello. And James is joining us from Cow River, Alabama. James, we hope you're safe as Hurricane Sally makes its way through the southeast region there. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Trudy, was of course, as you noted, this data runs through the end of 2019. So it was, the new data that was reported talks about up until the end of last year. How will the census kind of way of analyzing be impacted? Not that by the pandemic. In other words, will it be hard to do the analysis of our current reality as we come to the end of this year because of the unique ways that the economy has been impacted, that the labor has been impacted, even contact with institutions? I think about children that haven't been in schools for many months, and all the public places that people go that they're not accessing, they're not connecting with right now. Will that have an impact as you look to next year and working on the 2020 data?
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely it will. It's going to affect everything that we do. We will be out in the field with this survey next February, March, and April, hopefully in person, hopefully post-vaccine, right? And we will ask people about their experience in 2020. So we'll learn about people's employment in 2020. We'll learn about their income. We'll learn about whether or not they had health insurance in 2020, whether they lost health insurance in 2020. So next year we will, and next year we'll be able to compare those answers to what we got this year to see really what how the pandemic has really affected our economy and the well-being of people. In addition, we have a little survey that we've been putting out on through email. We call it the Household Pulse Survey. That's looking at people in more real time. So that's going out to people, and we're processing it within 2 weeks. We put out those numbers every Wednesday. If people want to look on our website, and we're asking things like food security questions. Did you go hungry? Did you have enough food to eat? Did you have trouble getting the food that you needed? We're asking questions about education. Were your children able to connect online? Did you have a computer for your kids? Was your internet connection secure? About your housing, do you think were you able to pay your rent last month? Are you worried about being able to pay your rent next month? Every federal agency had the opportunity to contribute a few questions. And so there's some questions about mental health as well, about being depressed, and about whether you got the extended unemployment benefits, about whether you got the stimulus check or not. So look at our website for more up-to-date numbers on that. It's of course affected the 2020 census in that we had to delay being in the field. We hope everybody will go online and fill it out online or return the form, but there's always people that we need to go door to door in order to enumerate them, and so the pandemic has certainly made that more difficult this year. But they're out in full force now with masks, properly socially distancing, and just got a report today that we're up to 90%. So.
90%. That's great. Congratulations. That's
that final 10%, but we need 100%.
And really to make it really clear, if someone's watching tonight or they're working with a community that particularly a community that maybe is less likely to have completed the census, where would they go if they need to go online? Where do they go to complete it?
Census.gov. You can go right to census.gov and you can get either completed online, or you can get a phone number where you can call in and do it on the phone.
And what if someone's working, joining us tonight from a community maybe that is not a predominantly English-speaking community? Are there ways to complete the census with assistance?
We have it in many different languages. I don't want to count the language, but many different languages, and we have assistance in many different languages.
Excellent. Trudy, I was thinking that it's to talk about the census and some of the things that are in the reports, excuse me. I feel like, especially in these times, it's important to look or to dig a little deeper in some of the data around race and ethnicity that you published. I want to put up a slide, one of the slides from the report, from the press packet of the report. This is a real median household income slide by race. From the mid-1960s through 2019. And it obviously, in some cases, it looks like data wasn't collected, for certain groups up until a certain point in time. And then it also notes periods of time in our country's history where there were economic recessions. But what are some of the things that we can glean or learn from this data? I mean, there seem to be some glaring elements in terms of the disparity between household income by race. But what else do you think is important for us to understand about this slide?
Well, one thing to know is that if you can see the very end, you can see everything shooting up at the end. So you can see that income did go up between 2018 and 2019 for every group. Blacks increased by 8%, Hispanics by 7%, non-Hispanic whites by 5.7%, and Asians by 10.6%. So we did see economic growth across the board, increase in real median household income across the board. But what's also very notable are the disparities, and you can see that the median income for Asian households is twice the median income for Black households at $45,400. And just to remind people, the median is the halfway point. So when we say the median household income for Black households is $45,000, half of the households earn less than that, half of the households earn more than that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, just to think about that, $45,000 divided by, in half, right, is for a household income,
Yeah.
regardless of where you live in the country, regardless of how it's adjusted for geography
Mhm.
or even age, is jarring to think about, right? Yeah, and this this kind of information, it seems that sometimes it can be hard for us as U.S. citizens, as folks who live here in the U.S. to appreciate a chart like that, because um, we we naturally get very caught up in the reality within our own community, our own region. Of course, this takes a step back and helps us think about the nation as a whole. But we're a really big country. Does the census break down this sort of data by region or even by state? In other words, can we come to understand this through the lens of our state or even our kind of region within a state?
Well, perfect question for tonight, because tomorrow, or maybe even at midnight tonight, I believe, we will start to release the numbers from the American Community Survey. And that's that much larger survey. That's a survey of 3.5 million households every year. And that gets broken down into the 1 year data is released for any place with at least 65,000 people. So you can get many data from many counties. You can get data for every city and for every state. Later in the year, in December, we will release what we call the 5-year ACS data, which takes 5 years. So that's 15 million households.
Mm.
And that goes all the way down to the neighborhood level. So that goes to the district, to the census tract level. And you can get incredible wealth of statistics for your local area from that American Community Survey. And that is all available on our website at data.gov, data.census.gov. And there's a way that you just, it's like a search. You search for what you want, poverty, Chicago, Illinois, and it'll pull up tables for you, all sorts of different tables about poverty in Chicago for you.
Has the internet made the census more cool? The Census Bureau more cool? It seems like the ability to access this data so much more easily for the average person has got to really increase the. Not to say the work wasn't important, but now anybody with some basic understanding of charts and tables and things like that can really can do this sort of analysis about their own community. This has to be, thinking back 20 years, that capacity wasn't there.
I'm old enough that I remember when you had to go down into the government documents section of the library, in, moldy, dusty, and dig through these volumes of census books in order to try to get any data for local areas. And then it was always 10 years old. You could only get it every 10 years. So yes, it's been an amazing revolution. And if anybody needs help, there are phone numbers on the census website where you can call. And that's, I have a whole staff whose job is to answer those calls and to help people get the data that they need. So we try to make it easy for people to get, but if you're don't hesitate to call, because there's people who just love talking to our users. I mean, that makes our day to be able to help somebody get access to the data.
That's great. That's great. Trudy, I want to step away just for a minute. I want to thank our sponsors and share a couple announcements. Before I do that, I just want to say welcome to Stephen from the University of San Diego's Francis Harp Center for Catholic Thought and Culture. Welcome, Stephen. Thanks for being with us tonight. And Trudy had mentioned that you can find the information that she's talking about, all this information from the reports and other things at data.census.gov. So make sure to check that out. Trudy, I'm gonna do some announcements and thank our sponsors, and I'll come back to you in a second. So don't feel free to take a little break. So here are a few ways to connect with the Ignatian Solidarity Network for all those who are joining us out there tonight. First, I want to tell you about our Voting is an Act of Love campaign. This fall, you can exercise the right and responsibility to vote for candidates and issues that support the common good and concern for the most vulnerable people in our society. Join ISN's Voting is an Act of Love campaign to register and commit to vote and to mobilize your community. You can get involved at igsol.net. That's igsol.net/vote. Also, from October 19th to the 26th, you can be part of the first virtual Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. You can join the largest annual Catholic social justice gathering in the country from a screen near you. Join us for incredible speakers, including Father Brian Massengale, Olga Segura, Mauricio Lopez, Father Greg Boyle, Father James Martin, Bishop Mark Seitz, Sister Helen Prejean, and lots of other exciting speakers. Act quickly today because today is actually the last day to register to lock in the early registration pricing. So if you're watching now, don't stop watching, but just when you're done watching, you want to go to ignatiansolidarity.net/IFTJ and register today. We'd love to have you join us for this year's Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. We have nearly 5,000 people already registered. Also, applications are available for those interested in presenting at the teach-in. The deadline is actually approaching. It's this Friday. You can find details at the same website, ignatiansolidarity.net/IFTJ/speaker. So make sure to check that out. Also, other things happening virtually as well, of course. On September 23rd, ISN will honor Sister Simone Campbell, the Executive Director of Network, and Father John Bauman, the founder of the Pacific Institute for Community Organization, PICO, which is now known as Faith in Action. We'll be honoring them for their significant commitment to leadership for social justice rooted in faith. And we'll be doing so at ISN's annual Ignite, a celebration of justice event. And of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the event will be held virtually. It was supposed to be in San Francisco in late April. We are really disappointed that we can't celebrate our honorees there, but the good thing is that you can be part of it now because it'll be celebrated virtually. So make sure to learn more about that. Go to ignatiansolidarity.net/ignite. I also want to invite you to take action tonight. I mentioned the realities of racial inequity in our country right now in the context of the census. I'd like to invite you into action related to policing that ties to the realities of racial injustice, systemic injustice in our country. You can join ISN and our partners at the Jesuit Conference's Office of Justice and Ecology and calling on the U.S. Senate to take immediate action to address the social sin of police violence through federal police reform legislation. You can take action right now by texting REFORM, that's REFORM, to 202-800-1541. Again, that's REFORM to 202-800-1541. And now let me tell you about our sponsors for Solidarity on Tap. First, Mary Knoll Lay Missioners, who work internationally with those at the margins for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. To learn more about their work, join their Meet a Missioner Monday live streams on their Facebook page every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to join them next Monday. All right. Secondly, we have the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, JVC. They're a full-time volunteer program that works for social justice while exploring spirituality and faith through a framework of Catholic Ignatian values for individuals between the ages of 21 and 35. You can learn more at jesuitvolunteers.org. And finally, JVC Northwest. They're focused on the core values of community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection. JVC Northwest is a national direct AmeriCorps program serving in 24 locales across Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And you must be over 21 to be eligible for JVC Northwest. And you can go to jvcnorthwest.org to learn more about their work. We also invite you to join us for upcoming Solidarity on Taps, continuing every 2 weeks throughout the fall. You can see the lineup of our upcoming speakers here on the screen. You can learn more at ignatiansolidarity.net/Solidarity on Tap. And if you like the conversation this evening and want to share it or watch it again, this and all the previous Solidarity on Tap videos, recordings are available at ignatiansolidarity.net or on our YouTube and Facebook pages. So don't worry, you can always go back and find them. And also, If you enjoyed tonight's conversation, please consider giving a gift to sustain the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and you can do that at ignatiansolidarity.net/donate. And as I mentioned earlier, we love people sharing that they're with us here on virtually tonight by sharing on social media. So make sure to share a picture of yourself watching or having a virtual watch party to your Instagram account and tag us at Ignatian Solidarity. That's the @ symbol, Ignatian Solidarity. And don't forget to use that hashtag ISN Live. We want to feature you in our next story about Solidarity on Tap. And now let's get back to Trudy, and we have some questions from the crowd. I have some questions myself. One other thing I want to address before we bring in some questions from those who are watching us tonight. We didn't get to talk about gender and the ways that that plays into the census as well. So I want to bring up another slide here from the report. This is real median earnings from 1960 to 2019. It looks both at total workers as well as full-time year-round workers. And we see a grave discrepancy between males and females in terms of wages. We see a little bit of the gap closing, but still a great discrepancy. And I was curious to know, this is something that is pretty well known in society, this exists, but I was curious to know what are the interconnections with some of the other data that you look at, especially around poverty and how it interplays with the fact that women are making significantly less than men in society.
Well, first I was going to say that those numbers that you just showed on the slide are the numbers that we use to get I think most people have heard about the idea that women only make 80 cents on the dollar. And it's those numbers that we use to calculate that statistic, which actually for this year is 82 cents on the dollar. So women make 82.3 cents for every dollar that men make. And that's try to compare apples to apples. So we're comparing full-time year-round workers to get that. And it has improved a little bit. It was back in 2007, it was 77.8. So we have made some progress. But I think the most notable place where we see that differential between the earnings of men and earnings of women is when we look at poverty by family type. And we see that poverty rates of female-headed households are much higher than the poverty rates for male-headed households or for married coupled households. The poverty rate for female-headed households is over 20%, while for married couples it's 4%. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how those statistics, as you move into looking at and analyzing more data from 2020 in light of the pandemic, what sort of trends you see related to those, again, in terms of female versus male-led households. I mean, I would think there's going to be a lot to dig into there.
The shame is that women did really well in this economic expansion, that since the Great Recession in 2007, the growth rate in earnings for women has been higher than men. The women getting full-time year-round jobs has been higher than men. Someone used this expression the other day, the she-covery. While men were pretty flat throughout the entire expansion, but I think the early indications are that women have lost all of those gains, and even in this short time that we've been in the pandemic, because it's been women who have been forced out of the labor force, and bear the burden of taking care of their kids when the child care centers are closed, or having to educate the kids at home.
Sure.
There's been a little bit of research already out about how this is really going to hit women, just as the pandemic has hit minorities disproportionately, it's also hit women disproportionately.
Sure.
Not speak of minority women, right? Who are often those essential workers, and who have been sicker than other people, and that also have these responsibilities, the family responsibilities.
Right. Trudy, I want to share a couple of questions we've gotten from folks who are watching tonight, and just a reminder to those watching that you can please share your question in the comment thread there, either on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to get to it. This question is from Heidi, and it's a little bit robust, so it kind of gets into us here, but it says, hello from Los Angeles in a watch party with St. Mark's Adult Ministry Group. Which states, counties are applying the data gathered to address the needs of vulnerable communities in ways that you think should be highlighted? So I guess, and are there any scholars or institutions you'd like to give a shout out to? So I guess the question is, how is the data around poverty being applied? Are you seeing examples of ways that the data's application of the data is having an impact on public policy or on even the work of academics to dig deeper into it? Any examples of that?
A good example in California, a project out of Stanford that is working with I think it's called the Public Policy Institute, California Public Policy Institute. They actually have a California poverty measure where they take some of the ideas that we took from the supplemental poverty measure and apply them directly to California, and have been putting out a measure for California that allows people in California to look at the county level to see the impact of anti-poverty programs on poverty in California. People in New York City have also been doing that for many years now. They've had their own poverty measure, really focused on looking at the impact of anti-poverty programs on poverty. University of Wisconsin as well. I'm from Wisconsin. I should have to mention Wisconsin, but
yeah.
So there's been quite a bit of work done throughout the country on that.
Great. And I mean, I would think that there's probably lots happening from an application perspective too that happens in local communities that maybe folks aren't aware of, and especially since the data is so accessible, as you noted earlier. We had a question, it didn't come through that we can post on the screen. We had a question asking a little bit more about healthcare insurance coverage in ways that it varied. You mentioned some of the changes that you're seeing in terms of health insurance coverage, but ways that it varied by race, and specifically people of Hispanic origin. The person asked if there were any changes that you saw in that respect.
Well, when we look at health insurance coverage by race, it's very notable the higher uninsured rate for Hispanics. For non-Hispanic whites, 6.3% of the population lack health insurance, while for Hispanics it's 18.7%. So almost triple the rate. Blacks are 10%, Asians 6.6%. So it's very, very notable for that. And when we look at year-to-year changes in the uninsured rate, it went up for people of all races and children of all races, but it particularly went up for Hispanics. For Hispanics children, it was up a whole percentage point from 8.2% to 9.2% of children.
Great. And you mentioned children. I was curious to know what the recent reports that were published this week, what they tell us about the situation of children in the context of poverty.
So, like other numbers that we released yesterday, for child poverty, it was the lowest child poverty rate that we have seen since 1959. Let me find it here. I almost have these memorized, but not quite. So the child poverty rate was 14.4%, but that's down quite a bit from during the Great Recession, where it was almost up to 20%. That's compared to the adult poverty rate, and is 9.4%. And for people 65 years and older, it's below 9%. It's 8.9%.
And are there ways to look at? I mean, a lot of this data analysis happens in the area, kind of looking, not tracking people from year to year, but are there ways to look at do child poverty rates at one point in history have an impact on poverty data later on in history?
Well, we're really fortunate at the Census Bureau that we have now new techniques where we can use administrative records so that we can actually look at people throughout their lives.
Hmm.
This is all very experimental. It doesn't come out in any of these official reports, but we're able to take somebody that we see in a survey and we know all their characteristics and their educational background, but then we can match that to their Social Security records. So we know their earnings going back 20 years or forward 20 years. So we have been able to do some of that longitudinal analysis to look at people over time. And probably the most exciting work we've been doing is with doing that with decennial census data, or we can, one economist on my staff is actually looking at the impact of grandparents' earnings on their grandchildren. So how much mobility do we have across generations? And what they're finding is that there's not as much mobility as we would like to see. That pretty much if your grandparents were poor, there's a really good chance you're going to be poor too.
Well, I have one last question, and it seems a little unapropos after that, your last comment, but I was going to ask you, in the work that you do at the U.S. Census Bureau, what gives you hope?
Well, the reason, it was a hard decision for me to leave the world of advocacy to go work for the federal government, and it was like, that it seemed out of character for me. I think a lot of my friends were surprised by it, but I felt that I could do more good from within the federal government. I could do more good making sure that data was accessible to people, that people had the data they needed to do their advocacy, than I could do as one advocate working on these issues. That I could have a bigger impact, and I tell my staff that all the time. They come in very interested in public policy and very interested in in fighting poverty, and I say, well, that's not our job. Our job is to describe it. Our job is to get the data out, but we can make an impact, because if we make our data useful to people and accessible to people that are developing these public policies, that are fighting, advocating for programs to fight poverty, then we can play a really important role. And so I have felt very content. I don't know if I would have wanted to be a federal bureaucrat my entire life. I'm glad that I don't regret any of the years I spent doing advocacy. But at this point in my life, I felt like I could contribute more because I had that perspective. I know what the people on the ground need, and I know what the ways that we could work to make it easier for people to get that data and use that data. And it's important, as an advocate, you need that background in order to, and to support your arguments.
Absolutely. Well, Robin gave us one more reminder. She said for 2020 census language support by phone, visit 2020census.gov/EN, which I assume probably stands for English, and then ways to respond, and then responding by phone. So I think you could probably get to that link by going to 2020census.gov or census.gov as well. But I think it's a good thing to end on. Just one more reminder to, if you haven't completed the U.S. Census, to please do so. If you work in a community where you can invite others to pose that question to others and invite them to complete the U.S. Census, to do so. Is there a deadline, Trudy, when we need to do this by?
As soon as possible.
ASAP. Okay.
It's up in the air exactly when the deadline is, but it's better to do it now than to wait. And people should also know that their data is absolutely secure. Absolutely secure. There's no danger in responding to the census at all. We swear for life that we will keep your data private, and we have a really, really good track record of doing that. So Yeah.
That's important. Thanks for mentioning that, because I know for immigrant communities and other communities that are experiencing vulnerability, that fact is really important to know. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Well, Trudy, again, thanks so much for being with us tonight for Solidarity on Tap, and thanks to everyone out there across the country who joined us all the way from Alaska to the East Coast and everywhere in between. It's wonderful to be with you tonight in this community. Make sure to join us in 2 weeks for Solidarity on Tap, and have a great night. Thanks, everyone.
You, and thank you all for all the help that you've done so far in helping making this census a real big success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you.